Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Modern Sales Pros DE&I event, first gen in the revenue community. Today, we're sitting with some amazing folks to talk about what it's like to be first generation in the revenue community, how to advocate for yourself in the workplace, and other great advice. The Modern Sales Pros Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee is working really hard to bring you events and content around a particular DE&I related topic every single month. And if you don't know what Modern Sales Pros is, we are the largest community in the world of revenue leaders, according to us, but I think according to everything else too. And we help leaders answer questions they might otherwise struggle to answer on their own. If you're seeing this recording and you're thinking, I want to be a part of this community, you can apply to do that on our website. And if you like this content, you're really going to love our Revenue Excellence Summit that's happening in October from October 12th through 14th. We're going to talk people, process, and technology to help you really get planful and ready for 2022. And much of the content that we bring to our community, it's all possible through the sponsorship of many of our amazing sponsors like Chorus and SalesLoft, who are sponsoring this DE&I event and many others. So thank you to them for helping to achieve our goals of being a more inclusive community. Before we dive in, some light housekeeping notes. This is a pre-recorded session, but if you have questions for the DE&I committee, our amazing panelists, or just want to see what we're up to, all of that information is available on our DE&I landing page. This is our agenda for today. We're just going to have a really informal discussion, like we're having coffee with one another. We're going to talk about the experiences of being first in the revenue community. We're going to talk advice about how to build an inclusive culture, and then do some pro tips and some key takeaways from our panelists. And hopefully we'll have some Q&A that we gathered from our forum posts and from our lovely DE&I committee. These are the awesome folks who have volunteered their time, their experience, and their energy to give us some insight on being first in the revenue community. So welcome, Jorge and Johnny. So happy to see you here. I love the suits. I love the colorful prints we're doing today. And Jorge, I'll pass it to you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, good afternoon. My name is Jorge Estrada. I am Director of Partnerships at SimilarWeb. I have been in sales my entire career. But I'm excited about this conversation. I'm first generation in revenue. I came to this country when I was 10 years old, and I'm excited to share the stories that have gotten me to this point, and hopefully that'll help some of the people that are thinking about going into revenue that are first generation, sort of light the path a little bit.
Awesome. And Johnny?
Yep, I'm Johnny Ocean. Really excited to be a part of this as well. First generation American. My parents came here at a very young age from Jamaica and Haiti, not knowing anybody, and were able to be super resilient, bring themselves up, and instill a really strong work ethic in myself and both my sisters and the rest of our family too. But I've been in sales for probably about 10 years now. I've done some accounting before, I've coached football before, so kind of had an interesting path, but I love it, and I'm looking forward to helping other folks get into the sales community, in the occupation, because it's a great one.
Awesome, love that. So I know we talked a little bit about how you are first gen and first gen issues and challenges and opportunities present themselves in many ways in the workplace and in sales in general. But can you just give us a brief background about the experiences you've had being first gen, not only just in the workplace, but in sales specifically, and any challenges that might come from that? Jorge, I can start with you.
Yeah, definitely. So I think first and foremost, the reality is that you don't really have an influence in front of you that has done this before. For me at least, I saw a lot of my friends that had their parents who were relatively successful, and they had that to look up to or forward to, and not having that guidance was something that I sort of saw a struggle with. Luckily for me, there are people along my path and my way that helped me and sort of took on that role to try to mentor me in some ways. So I try to do that now with people who I see that needs a little bit of help, because you really just don't know, right? And that was probably the biggest struggle for me, that you can get access to mentorship, because that was usually the role of your parents. And when you're first generation, I mean, you're the first one doing it, right? So I think that reality is true for a lot of people. And I think the other thing for me, it was having the sort of luck that people were willing to just put themselves in that position and show me the way, which that's not something that everyone gets, and that's why I try to do it. Now that I'm on the other side, in some ways, I might not be as wise as those people, but at the same time, I try to help out.
That's amazing that you had that kind of in your community. What was that relationship like? Like they offered that mentorship thing to you? Did you go out asking for it when you had that partnership? Like, how did you structure your meetings? Like, was it with friends? Was it with peers' parents?
It was sort of organic. And I would want to, I point back to sports because, and I had this great Hall of Fame wrestling coach in high school who really was a father figure to a lot of boys and men eventually. So it was organic in that way. But I think what happens is a lot of people don't realize that there are people like me or Johnny that have that first generation sort of banner behind them, and when you realize that, you see that there are some things that are missing within that, because there's just no path. No one's done it before in their family, so there's got to be a way, and people sort of recognize that. And for me, it was organic, really, how it came down to. I wish that I could tell you that I had like the drive to get all my friends' parents together and sort of get a committee, but I didn't. It just sort of happened, and that's the luck part, that I got that without really doing much, as opposed to really putting it together. Sadly, I wasn't that smart when I was 16, 17, or now.
No, I love that. That's very honest, and everyone's experience is so different. Johnny, what about you? What kind of experience have you had?
So my experience has been like a little similar, to Jorge, but I would say overall it's been pretty positive. I've had a lot of success. I attribute that really to the work ethic that my family kind of gave me, right? So I always remember at like a real young age, I learned how to work really hard, right? Because I watched my dad, I watched my mom make a lot of sacrifices, heard about the sacrifices they made, so their kids could have a better opportunity than they had. My parents were both kind of burdened with coming over, to this country alone, and then saving up enough money to bring their siblings over as well. So that's a difficult thing, to live through. So at a young age, basically being told like, this is the minimum. Like, what you see here is the minimum. You have to be better than this. You have to do more than this. That's why we left our home to come here, and really it was for you. So, I feel like a lot of my experience has been based off of that type of, work ethic. But at the same time, I recognize I've had to be way more like conscious about how I communicate with people, and more thoughtful on, my responses and their responses, almost like walking on eggshells in a way. I grew up in a place that was one of the safest cities in America, at one point. It might still be kind of close to that. So, I was able to grow up with a lot of folks that were really fortunate that, their parents were well off, right? And then there, I was, kind of navigating, that world. So being able to kind of trying to relate to all these different types of people, is an experience that I had to deal with and still deal with regularly. And then I would say kind of the last experience that's been more apparent in the last like few years, probably like 5 years or so, is, my parents understanding that, being in sales is a great profession, right? Like it's leading a sales organization is comparable, is up there with being a doctor, being a lawyer, being a politician. And that's what I grew up hearing was like, that's what you're supposed to be, right? So kind of in recent years, helping them understand that, the occupation I, picked and my career choice, is incredible, and more, folks going into the workforce should look at that role as an option.
That's great. I wanted to touch on something that both of you kind of brought up. You're talking about values that your parents instilled in you, but then navigating this workplace that necessarily isn't built for you and trying to get ahead there. And so I wanted to know, have you noticed that there are any opportunities that you might miss out on because you don't know the language, or your communication styles aren't the same? Or how do you navigate, like Johnny, you said that was a big learning curve for you. How did you navigate that? Like, how do you bring your whole self to work when your whole self isn't a part of your work environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think I spent a lot of time over the years spending a lot of time with a lot of different people from all walks of life, so one thing I always wanted to be is really relatable to a lot of folks, right? And understand where they come from and, what challenges they have and what they're really excited about, and being open to new experiences, so that I could always kind of relate to them. So, I'll never forget, I interviewed at this one tech company, and one of the folks that interviewed me went to Alabama. Right now, like, I'm a big football guy. I love football. I can talk about football all day long. But he was like a swimmer. So I could relate to the Alabama football side, but I could also relate to like the swimmer piece of it, because I had friends that were swimmers in high school. I learned to swim as a kid. I was pretty terrible. Had swimming lessons. I actually didn't learn how to swim in swimming lessons. My lacrosse coach taught me how to swim. But I think a lot of the opportunities that you're able to be a part of, a way to maximize that is to kind of put yourself in more experiences that you're not necessarily comfortable in, to learn more about them, so that when you're meeting with folks that, don't come from where you come from, aren't first generation Americans, aren't people of color, you can relate a little bit more, and if you're sitting next to another candidate that's kind of, has the same background, they're not just going to default to the person that they feel like they know, and is easily relatable. You can kind of relate to them as well.
Yeah, that's great.
That's just such a good story, because the thing that people don't really realize is, if you're first generation, not all the time, but it probably means that you come from lower means from a socioeconomic perspective. You come from a family that's not as educated. I mean, you may come from an educated family, but most likely you're not. But I think one of the really positive things that comes from that is that it builds a lot of resilience, because as you're going through your life, and even in your career, you start having to do a little bit extra, or look at things from a different perspective, so that you get the most out of them, because you may not get another chance as opposed to somebody else. And you sort of start taking ownership of that process, and knowing that you're probably not going to get as lucky as other people may. So I think that whenever I look for people for my teams, for example, I look for that gritty, sort of resilient, I would want to call it sort of street smarts, but it's not really street smarts, because I think that carries a negative connotation. It's more about being able to be flexible and to pivot. And I think people that go through these experiences, whether they're first generation or they come from not the best family situation, or not the best economic situation, they tend to be more aligned to those traits. And I think that's a great advantage for, at least for me, it's helped me in situations where I could have folded and given up. And I'm sure for Johnny, it's done the same thing. And I think it comes from our parents being really sort of work heavy, and wanting to give us a better life, but also from just our situation, right? It's sometimes you just get the cards that you're dealt and you just have to go and do something with it.
Yeah,
Go
I would
ahead.
add to that too, like, you know, not being afraid to ask friends kind of, you know, what financial opportunities they've been familiar with, or, you know, what educational type of opportunities they've been familiar with, or asking friends of a friend, right? Like your circle, you know, is however big it is, right? But, you know, there's so much, you know, more knowledge out there, but like to acquire it, you have to put yourself, you know, outside of your comfort zone, right? So like, that's something that, you know, I feel like I learned that a little later in life, and I wish I did that way earlier, you know, which was like spending more time with my friends' parents, right? Or spending more time with my parents' friends to understand, okay, like, talk to me about the world of finances, right? Talk to me about, you know, what business is like what different things should I keep an eye out for? That's not something that I think, you know, I thought about. That's something I plan on kind of, you know, doing for my kids when I have them. But I think our parents being first generation Americans, right? Like they had so many other things to think about, you know, that wasn't, you know, the top priority. While for other families, you know, they've built, you know, they've had a big footprint, you know, in this country for a while. So they're able to do those things.
Yeah, I can't agree more than that with you. It's amazing to have the opportunity to do that. And I think that's why there should be more people that are first gen in revenue, that there's just so many things that are positive about it, that at least from my perspective, I see an opportunity for you and me and everybody else that's listening to this call to take this and look at the candidates that they may not look at because they don't maybe have a college degree, or maybe they don't come from the same background as them. It adds a lot of perspective, and it actually makes, I mean, if you look at the science, it makes your results better. So I'm glad you said that.
Yeah, it seems that those skills that you're talking about, resiliency, motivation, adaptability, flexibility, all directly correlate to revenue, like the kind of skills and the trait that you need. Do you find that even once you're in the door, your past workplaces and even current ones are able to support you, and maybe those communication style differences, just like, and whatever is going on in the world? Like, how do you feel your workplaces have done in building an inclusive culture? And if they haven't done that, you know, do you have any advice on how to have those conversations, or have you had those conversations?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's a really important one. You know, it's hard for people to deal with something that they don't know about, and it's even harder for them to talk to somebody else about it, because there is such a thing right now, specifically speaking in the workplace, where you don't want to take that chance because you might offend somebody, or you might say something that they don't want to hear. But at the same time, what I found was always most helpful is when people sort of address things head on, and it became more of a conversation and a discussion around the topic. And one of the things that I noticed after these conversations was that the people that actually started them came up to me and said, you know, that I'm really really glad I had that, or I'm really happy that we talked about this. I think it's sort of validated for them the fact that they should have brought it up, and they shouldn't have been afraid to bring it up as well. So I think for me, a more direct approach has always worked better. But I would say that I think because of the situation, how touchy it can be, that people are less willing to bring it up. And even though they might want to, I think a lot more people do than actually end up doing it.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, it makes me think back to earlier in the year, or last year rather. You know, when we were in the height of, you know, many Black Lives Matter protests, you know, on a regular basis, right? And the organizations, you know, that I spoke with, that I was, a part of, that my friends, were a part of, they all took different approaches, right? And I just remember thinking, I appreciated the organizations that kind of stood up right away and made a decision and, told their employees, and everyone else that, followed them on social media or whatnot, where they stood on those issues. Because it gave you a feeling like, okay, this employer or, this company that, I, have packages shipped to my house from, for example, really stands with their people, and they did it right away. While some organizations waited, I think a lot of folks felt a little less than, right? Or they questioned, well, why is that organization, waiting or not saying anything, right? Are they okay with it? Like for those employees, I'm sure, they felt unsure of how their organization viewed them, right? But like from my experience, I mean, I would say to create like more of a supportive culture, especially, over the last, couple of years. I agree with a lot of what Jorge said as far as being straightforward. You might not say the right thing, right? But I know you're trying to say the right thing. I understand you might not have the words. And I would hope, a lot more people kind of feel the same way. And that opens up more of a dialogue, right? Because that's gonna help people learn from one another, like way more effectively, in my opinion. The organization I work for now, I mean, they did and they do a great job of promoting, a very diverse culture. So I'm fortunate there, but I've definitely been on a different end of it, where it wasn't really apparent. So I would say for managers, like care about your people, actually invest in your people, invest in what they care about, right? So like, what do you like to do? Like Jorge, I know you're a Dallas Cowboys fan, right? Like whoever, you report to should know that, right? And should know that, they don't have to know everything about the Cowboys, but they should know that you like the Cowboys and, they're typically a bad team in the NFC East on a regular basis. Just kidding.
No, we're gonna win the Super Bowl. I know it. This is our year.
I saw that one coming.
I love what you were saying about investing in your people, investing what they care about. And it brings me to this thought I had with where maybe someone's watching this and they're like, oh, great, I get to have a conversation about like racism with every single one of my BIPOC employees. Like we're so like we're not the same person, right? So like all of our wants and needs are different. So if you really get to understand, like just because this person is like a Black employee and they like football, that's not all that they are. So understanding like what your employees care about helps you to have those better conversations at the appropriate times, because sometimes it's not an appropriate time. Sometimes you're too exhausted to be having those conversations, and sometimes it's not your responsibility to. So I love that piece of advice of like, if you get to know every single one of your employees, this might be a little bit easier for you. I want to talk about advice. Like we talked about advice in the workplace for our managers. Advice do you have for other first gen folks? How do you build a supportive environment in your network? I know, Jorge, you said you look for those key traits like resiliency and you kind of bond over that familiarity. But are there any networks that you have that you particularly love? What's your support like?
Yeah, I would say locally, if you're in revenue and you're going to be customer facing, which I just happen to be, if you look at Toastmasters, if you join any local sort of public speaking organization, not that it's around first gen, but one of the things that Johnny brought up was it's hard to know how to communicate with different people, especially if you don't have the same background. So that sort of teaches you to normalize. I give the example of when I first came here, I didn't know how to speak English. So what I did is I watched WB33 Friends was on at like 6 p.m. and I would watch that and be like, okay, that's how people talk. And then I would look at the word, and that's how I learned, right? So this is sort of similar. Now you're learning how to speak publicly to a crowd, and it's a business crowd, which is something that a lot of us could work on. And I think for me, that there's local chapters of chambers organizations like Hispanic commerce and organizations, or Latino, Black, whatever it may be. Those are the kinds of places where you can find mentors. And I think one of the other things that I've done in my past is just going on LinkedIn, finding somebody that looks kind of like me, and reaching out to them and saying, hey, would you like to sit down for a coffee or a virtual meet? And most people are actually really open to that, which is surprising, but also shows you that there are people willing to help, which I think is important for anybody, whether you're first gen or not, to really understand.
That's awesome. I'm stealing that LinkedIn idea. Johnny, anything?
I'm a part of a few communities, like one being Revenue Collective, which is now called Pavilion. Yeah, that one has definitely helped me out a lot. We have a group called, it used to be called the Revenue Collective, like of color, but now it's like Pavilion of Color. Rev Genius has been helpful for me as well. But really just kind of like being very like outgoing and open to, being like not being in my comfort zone, right? So like meeting people out and about, getting to know who they are as a person first, and then finding out kind of what they do, and how they got there. I mean, I met, so one of my good friends now, I actually met at a gym, and he referred me to one of my previous companies, right? And so it's just kind of being open to meet, a lot of folks at any point in time, and kind of just seeing where it goes. But I love the idea of reaching out to folks on LinkedIn, to kind of get to know other people that way too, if you can't leverage some sort of like formal, type of community.
Love that. I think I want to hop into the Q&A next, but I want to get one like tweet length key takeaway. Like if you were going to summarize this whole thing for us in a tweet today, and I hope it's positive, what would you say? It could be advice, it could be just whatever you want.
I think for me, it's just keep going, keep trucking, and look for help, because nobody, no matter what they say, can do this or be successful at anything without any help. So I think it's worthwhile to really think about how you could leverage that. So
Awesome.
And I would say, like learn your why and then think about the why behind it, right? And then take your work ethic, and kind of mold the two, and use that as like a fuel or a fire to hit your goals. That might be a
That?
while.
Yeah, me neither. Okay, let me pop my screen open. So we put this question in the forum. We just basically said, can you all see my screen, the right one? Okay. If you have any questions for our folks who are going to be talking about first gen revenue, let us know. And we've got our MSP team and who happen to be on our DE&I team to kind of present these questions. Does anyone want to start from our team?
Can I ask a question not on this?
Yes, please.
Okay. So this might be like a little bit of a spicy question, but I think you guys mentioned this earlier, and either one of you please chime in. But I think a lot of I come across, like, I'm not first generation American, but I'm first generation like white collar and first generation educated, and I've noticed the work ethic thing. You definitely experience it. So I'm curious, how have you guys navigated colleagues and peers throughout your career who don't necessarily have that same grit? How have you navigated your relationships with them and like your team dynamic with them?
I love spicy questions, first of all. So thank you. I'm kind of a spicy guy. So Um, all kidding aside, I think that a lot of people that seem to not have that work ethic actually do have that passion. You just kind of have to figure out where it lies. And I think for me, um, if someone likes golf, for example, I don't really like golf. I think it's kind of boring. I'm just going to be honest. But if someone likes golf and that's their passion, then they're not doing as well in the workplace, and I'm going to try to tie things to golf and do a little bit more around that person. And I think that anytime you have someone that's sort of struggling, even if it's not even related to this, you can look at what their underlying passions are. And Johnny mentioned this in his tweet, and really relate to them. And I think for people who are first gen, one of the struggles is that people don't really, the people that are in revenue that are leading the organizations don't really understand these underlying passions, right? And I think our job is to make people more comfortable in sharing those passions so that your managers can actually do something with them and help you improve your career.
That's an awesome answer. I think too, people expect in revenue, they expect the humans working in it to be money passionate and money motivated. And there's outliers besides that. So that's a really great answer. Thank you, Jorge.
Yeah, I would say I fully agree with that, as well. Just kind of getting to know that person, understanding what motivates them, which can be really hard to do. But I think one thing to do that is they need to understand what motivates you on a personal level, right? Because I think people are way more open to opening up, right, when you've already kind of lowered your wall, so they can learn more about you. So I would share more about your background, where you're from, what you like to do, kind of what your upbringing was like. And I think that's going to translate to someone else doing the same thing in response to you.
Totally. Thank you, Johnny. And just as a disclaimer, no, everyone on the MSP team is great. This is just a general question because I know that people experience that in the workforce.
I have kind of like a personal question, I guess. So I'm half first generation. My mom came to the US from Taiwan, and she came with a very aggressive, like, you need to be the best at everything mentality. So like in the career, in school, in literally everything. So what did your parents like want you to be when you were younger, and how do they feel about the career that you chose, sales? Is that too personal?
No, I'll go for it.
Okay.
So I'm pretty sure my dad wanted me to be like a politician, and when I was like younger, and I wanted to be like a storm chaser originally. So like, I don't know if anyone's seen the movie Twister. I thought that was awesome. I was like, I'm gonna drive around in a truck and chase tornadoes for a way. And my dad was like, you're never gonna make any money doing that. So that's probably not a great idea. But yeah, I think they allowed me to kind of try a lot of different things, whether it was sports, whether it was like music, art. I basically kind of had the runway to try, almost whatever I wanted to try. And then from there, kind of decide where I wanted to go from there. But my dad definitely always wanted me to be like a politician for sure. That definitely wasn't for me. But now, I mean, talking to him about sales and kind of what I do, he really likes it. He thinks it's really interesting. He sees the politics in it in a way. So I think he part of him says, well, I kind of got what I wanted. He's just a politician in like a sales org, basically. But yeah.
I was totally going to chime in and say that and be like, sales and politicians have more than you think in common.
I think it's important to realize that, at least for me, I could have, I was lucky, and I was kind of, school came naturally to me, and I didn't really have the opportunity to expand on that, because when I looked down at a piece of paper and I looked at what profession could make the most money right away, sales was it, right? So I think when your parents look at, things that people think are normal and successful, like being a doctor or being a lawyer or anything professional like that, they look at how much money they bring in. And I think sales gets a bad rap, but you can make, let's just cut to the chase. You can make a lot of money as a salesperson. And I think a lot of people that are first gen need to realize that. For me, that was a conscious decision, and it was sort of out of necessity to go into sales. But one of the things that I sort of realized earlier on that I think was fortunate for me was that I'd always been selling myself, because I've been in the situations where, I wasn't part of the crowd. I was an outsider coming in, and I think that helped out when it came down to making that decision, because it's something that also came naturally to me.
Right.
Ooh.
And the traits that you need to have as a good salesperson are things that you don't learn in school, like grit and tenacity and motivation and all of that. And yeah, our boss used to say that in sales, you can make infinity dollars. There's no limit. So like knowing those two things, I mean, I wish they taught sales in elementary school and got people on this path, because people just don't know that it's a really nice career path.
On that note too, I remember in one of our DE&I committee meetings, someone was talking about like who makes the best salespeople, and it's the kids who got in trouble for selling snacks at school, and the kids who like got in trouble for selling random stuff, and like those are the people who are really successful in sales. And it's funny because like they were the rule breakers, but love you all.
I used to have my uncle bring in American candy through the border down to Mexico, and I used to sell it in kindergarten. That and water
Yes.
guns. So
Yes, this is the entrepreneurial spirit you're looking for.
yeah.
Oh my God, I love it.
Well,
Taylor, should we ask the questions on the slides?
yes, I think Elizabeth will bring us home with
Okay.
one of the questions.
All right. So you touched on this first one kind of in a broad sense earlier in your conversation, but just in case you had anything more involved or personal that you wanted to share with this, how can your leader or colleagues best support you when there are negative events in the news that really strike a chord with you that you can relate to? How can they be a best support for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that unfortunately there's a lot of events that affect minorities or groups that are happening that are not positive. They're very negative, and I think they happen very often. So I think it's important for people to realize that you have to be understanding, right, of how that might affect somebody. And it really is down to the individual level. I mean, something might affect me differently than somebody that just looks just like me and has the same background. So you have to be aware of that. But I think at the same time, being cognizant that that's something that could affect the performance of somebody or the mood of somebody, even if you're dealing with them on a day-to-day basis. So making sure that you're aware of that, and if it's appropriate, bringing it up in conversation to give that person an outlet, because they might not have an outlet, and you don't know that. And in a lot of places, in a lot of ways, they don't. So for me, that would be really helpful if something was happening in my day. And it's been helpful in my career as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I would add, I think understanding that someone might not be in like the mental or emotional like headspace to talk about it at the time. It can be a lot, it can be difficult to be on camera, right? We're all on Zooms and, and WebExes all the time. So, some folks might not want to show their face that day. They might be a little disengaged, right? So I think, from a full organization perspective, having a strong leadership team to say, hey, we're going to, provide some sort of broad message to say kind of where we stand on this, and then for, managers, provided they have a good relationship, right, with that person to reach out to see how they're doing, that's something, last year I really appreciated, and was really kind of taken back when so many people reached out to me that I would never thought would have reached out to me from our organization. That definitely, made me feel a little bit better, filled my heart. And it was, but I could also see how that could be overwhelming depending on the person. Right. So I don't think there's a simple answer, for any of this. I think you really have to be in tune, with your people, and kind of in a way proceed with caution, but let them know that, you're there if they want the support.
I would like to ask a question kind of related to the second bullet point here. What is your most creative source for non-standard sales talent? So like, what's the most like random and great place you found success with hiring people who help bring diversity and different backgrounds into the sales world?
I think for me is I like to go out to like the local coffee shop or the local store, and anybody that's good to talk to or is willing to have a conversation while they're working hard. I mean, I look at that and I admire that. So I mean, I probably shouldn't say this when we're being recorded, but anytime I talk to somebody that's customer service on the phone and when I'm dealing with something personal, I mean, I try to recruit them because I just think that those skills are very apparent, right? And when you're willing to take the time to do your job, do it well, and do it with a lot of passion and fun, I think that's something that I really look for. And I think creatively, a lot of people don't really realize that they're being sort of evaluated when they're doing that. So it's also genuine. So for me, it's anytime I'm anywhere, I look for people that have those skills. And maybe that's part of how I was raised or my background, but that's something that I really like to do.
That's awesome. Johnny, because you didn't hire, right? But how are you finding yourself using those resources? Like, is there anything creative that you do that helps you get?
So it's funny, Jorge, you said that because I'm kind of doing the similar thing. So occasionally, a long time ago, I used to do door-to-door sales, which is 100% commission based. It's really hard, like rain or shine, snow, whatever, you're out there. So anytime I run into someone that does door-to-door, I always give them time because I remember what it was like. And, I found those are some of like the greatest like salespeople that are like kind of just coming up, that have so much energy, have so much passion. They might not really be passionate about what they're selling, but you wouldn't know it. So I'll always try to recruit them or point them in another direction if they want that. But I meet a lot of people at my local gym, and kind of befriend people that way, get to know them, and if we're having good conversations on a regular basis, then I might, and they're in a customer facing role, I might try to recruit them, or point them to someone who I know is hiring, and then especially pre-pandemic, we would go out to restaurants and bars all the time. Right. So meeting someone out that might be like an awesome bartender or just someone that's standing at a bar, that can, have small talk and get to know those folks. If it makes sense, trying to recruit them or pointing them to someone in my network that, they might want to learn from, take a call with, something like that.
That's awesome. Dismantling the system. I love it. All right, y'all. Any more questions from our audience today? Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you for your time, for speaking with us. This was awesome. It was helpful to hear. It was comforting to hear. I really, really appreciate everything that you did for us and how you're going to be helping future sales leaders and people on your community. Thank you once again. Thank you to our sponsors, SalesLoft and Chorus. Thank you to our DE&I committee. Thank you to our MSP team. Give us a wave. I appreciate all of you so much, and I hope to see you soon, and I hope everyone loved this recording. Bye.